to see that video because today's talk is moving beyond our stories. And I think what happens with that video is that we get to hear other stories happening around us. You'll notice that there are pictures from their past. How many of us have the stories of our lives?
And other people's lives also.
Those moments that we have turned into icons. Those moments that we have turned into touchstones. What I find so powerful about that video with the song is that they step back into those pictures. But what happens is they don't necessarily stay the same. There was a shift that happened in those stories. There was a shift that happens in those images. So if we think about how we are in relationship at that iconic moment, and then when we keep moving on, we never really can go back to that moment. We bring with us everything else that we have become. So moving beyond our stories is our capacity to keep bringing the expansion that each of us are forward. To keep allowing those stories to inform us and to expand us. Yesterday, I think Mykal mentioned that Center for Spiritual Living Seattle was holding its practitioner panels. And what panels are, it's the culmination of the 2 years of practitioner studies. It's an opportunity to have a series of responses to all kinds of questions to demonstrate a certain mastery of this science of mind teaching. Because if you're going to be a practitioner, like Stephanie, it really means that you have dedicated yourself to this teaching in such a way that you become available to support others with the wisdoms that this teaching offers. So while TAN offers counseling, and what counseling often does is it helps take those stories and deconstructs the stories. It helps people move beyond that stayed solid image. What happens with a practitioner is different. It's about looking not at the stories, but it's about looking at the beliefs that have been holding things in place. And the thing that's really unique about a practitioner session is that there aren't that many places where someone invites us to consider our beliefs. We often claim them, we often accept them, we often put them on our back, carry them around without ever analyzing them. So like with counseling, what you do is you pull out your stories and you analyze them, you think about them. With the practitioner work, you're pulling out your beliefs, but that's not something that you do automatically because beliefs are so automated. We just open our eyes and we are full-blown into our beliefs. We don't wake up in the morning and say, I wonder if there really is a world. I wonder if it really matters if I am present in the world. We don't often stop to think about our beliefs and how we are allowing our beliefs to be like the wind in our sails, moving us forward consciously and unconsciously. How many times do we find ourselves in a place and we may not have known how we've even gotten there? I think I've told this story before, but it's worth retelling. I was so familiar with how to get to work that on one occasion my blood sugar dipped so low that I was virtually in a pre-coma state, and I got all the way almost all the way to my old work site. I didn't go to where I was working then. I worked to where I worked before then.
Oh,
And it wasn't an easy route. I was on Lake City Way, which is a different kind of route than I-5. A different kind of route. And so I made it all the way from Federal Way to,
Oh my God.
all the way from Federal Way to the north end of the lake on Lake City Way. And I was very low. And I essentially totaled the vehicle. And the truck driver got out of the car and said, "What kind of a-hole are you?" He actually used the whole word, but I'm going to be reverencing you all here. And I said, "My blood sugar is very low. And the reason that I crashed your car was that you didn't have the taillights on your truck, and so I didn't have the clear images to stop." And he's like, "A-hole." Like, yeah. So when the EMTs arrived, I told them, like I told the truck driver who was cursing me out, "My blood sugar is dangerously low." And they tested me, and they said, "Well, it can't be that low if you're telling us that it's low." And it was 13. Typically, glucose levels are supposed to be between 80 and 120.
Oh my God.
So 13, they were like, "We just don't know why you're not in a coma. We just don't know why you're not
Oh
in
my
a coma."
goodness.
So I say this because I had enough going on that I could make it. I could make it on that route, and the only thing that stopped me was the taillights in the truck were broken. So actually, I mean, it wasn't me that got the ticket, it was the truck driver who got the ticket, because his taillights were broken.
oh, I love it.
Wow. Wow.
And so, it wasn't my fault, ultimately, even though I was completely out of my mind. But I tell that story because there is an element in all of us that is just able to go on autopilot and can be fairly successful. We often don't think about the amount of success that is able to unfold out of us from all that's unconscious. I mean, how many times do we think about each step of our day, each step of everything that we do? Part of making things unconscious is that that's what enables us to move through the day so that we can put our mind onto more important things. Because if we were to get in the car and drive it the way that we did, do people remember the first time they got in a car? Remember that the kind of, I can't speak for you, but there's a certain level of anxiety, a certain level of, can I do this? A certain level of, oh my gosh, if I crash this, my dad will kill me. If I, those kinds of things. We get into these automatic places. And often that's how the story of our lives go. We operate from those automatic ways of being. And it's when those disruptions happen that we question ourselves. So your sister's husband says, "What if we do things differently?" The brake goes on. Amy's dad dies. The brake goes on. Your dad dies. The brake goes on. Suddenly, your son, you're apprehensive about what's happening. The brake goes on. It takes us out of those ways, those customary ways of being. In the stories of our lives, I want to propose three ways to be with those stories of our lives. So 3 ways to move with our stories. And again, what I really liked about that video in the story of our life, is that you see the picture, but then they put themselves in the picture, and they're different. And the person in the picture is also different. So what they had, the conscious or unconscious, what they had the sense to realize is that the people in those have changed too. So in that one picture, it's the little boy and the little girl. And then it's the 2 in the same room. But she's taller and he's taller. And he can look at her and think about her in a different way. The different point of view is, can we see people as they've become? Can we see situations as they've become? Or do we get stuck in seeing it that same old way? I mean, for myself, I found it the hardest thing. I would go back home and I would find that my mom and my dad still expected me to behave in a certain way. And I see some nodding, so I guess I'm not the only one who's had that encounter. And for myself, I lacked the grace to
Go with the flow?
to go with the flow, the grace to just let them be rather than to resist it, rather than to fight it, rather than to say, why can't you see me as I am, rather than keep putting me in the box where I was. And I was like, what box? I don't see any box. And that would just drive me even crazier. And then I had some therapy. And a lot more therapy. And when I stopped the resistance, that's when they could say, oh, you've changed. As long as I was arguing for the change, it was unavailable to them to get a hold of it. But as soon as I could be changed without the grimaces and without the anger and without the resentment, can't you see I'm changed? It's like, well, no, you still seem like the same bare little boy that you were. But it's that. It's that ability to let them be what they were, rather than to fight them into something else I would prefer that they be. So, first thing is, can we change our point of view about the story? That isn't changing them. It isn't changing the story. It's changing how we approach the story. Just a question to ask ourselves. These are all invitations. Can we see it differently? The second point that I'd like us to think is, to help with the change, can we step out of those familiar roles? How familiar are we with the basic story theme? You know, there's the basic hero theme. Hero, heroine, living their life. All hell breaks loose, and the hero decides they're going to do something and fix it. A little dynamic that I want to talk about with that familiar story is that notion. There are three characters who all get involved in the play. There's the hero, there's the victim, and there's the persecutor. And we can so easily identify with any of those particular positions. How often does something happen to us and we're like racing into that victim place? I think I've talked before about how I could complain. Sometimes complaining was the only way that I felt I could get any attention. It was the only way that anyone would pay attention to me. It was the only way that I could make a connection, that it was my victimhood that made me lovable. It was my victimhood that made me available. It was my victimhood that made me who I was. But of course, victimhood kind of required that there be some kind of persecutor. There be some kind of villain. You know, do any of these stories ever not have a villain? Or some kind of horrible thing that's happened? I mean, you know, the villain, you know, and a lot of the stories, you know, as we've moved into this century, the anti-hero. Sometimes that villain is the one that's lifted and raised and praised and acknowledged. I mean, one of the things in Wicked, in the story of the Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West was not considered the heroine. She was not considered the one that you were like, I want to be her when I grow up. If little girls had said that to their moms would have said, you know, you might want to reconsider that notion of being the Wicked Witch of the West. But in the story Wicked, the author, Daniel Maguire, turned it on its head. The main character became the Wicked Witch of the West. And it was her story. And from her perspective, she stopped being the villain. In that story, there was an opportunity to look at her sympathetically. I mean, what would it have been like to be born a little green girl? Not the most immediately lovable little being that you have. Oh, look, here's my doll face. They didn't call her doll face. Can you believe that? They didn't call her doll face. She also had really wicked teeth. Can we change our perspective on those roles? On who's the hero, on who's the victim, on who's the villain? Can we step outside of that? Or can we watch ourselves getting sucked into that automatic naming? Let's consider that this is an expression, a moment. And how might we empathize with that? How might we approach those different perspectives? As the meditation said, that person that's like dragging you and making your life miserable, they are that opening, that doorway to growth, that doorway to opportunity, that doorway to expanded expression. Can we carry the belief? Can we change out that belief that we just have these plagues of people who are put into our lives for some unknown reason, and to say, what is this calling forth from me? Third thing I want to talk about, the third thing to consider is remember what's unseen. In any time that we have a story, there are elements happening behind the scene. There are elements about which we have no awareness. One of the central ideas of this philosophy is that our thoughts and our feelings create the worlds that we live in. That there is this aspect of the divine, which gets referred to in this particular faith tradition as the law. And the law takes those thoughts and takes those feelings and puts it into manifestation. That it goes from the unseen into the seen. Some of you may remember that Ernest Holmes used this teaching symbol. I'm raising my hands like this because he illustrated a circle which was to indicate the allness of creation. And he kind of subdivided it, top, middle, and bottom. Top was that mind. Top is those thoughts, those ideas. The middle was that action of the soul, that law, that automatic movement which brings things into being. And then that bottom part of the circle was the world of form, the world of things, the manifest universe. The other thing that's really important about the symbol is there was this V. But the thing about the V is that it's the divine, the spirit coming into form. But it's also, from form, it comes back up. And the form informs spirit. It isn't just a finish. Spirit is never finished. Our thoughts are never finished. And so often the stories finish. And that's what can be so challenging about our lives. A lot of times we just want our lives to be like those stories where it ostensibly ends and happily. How many of us would just love that happily ever after? So the thing to consider with remembering the unseen. I mean, right now it's very easy to say the sun exists. Anybody have a difficult time arguing that the sun exists? It's a little more challenging when the sun sets. When the sun falls below the horizon and all we experience is darkness. Now the scientific among us will say, well, but the moon is reflecting the sun, so I know that the sun is still there. One of my best metaphors that happened for me when I moved to the Pacific Northwest was seeing Mount Rainier. And Mount Rainier is just such a magnificent, majestic image. I mean, if you're driving down Rainier, I mean, it just is the whole street. I go to work at Denny International Middle School, and some days it's there, and some days it's not. I go there, and it's like, there's the mountain, and there's this tiny little itty-bitty school. Mountain, tiny itty-bitty school. And yet, how many days of the year is it impossible to even know that Mount Rainier can exist?
Quite a few.
Yeah.
Because it's cloud covered. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean that it stopped existing. It's not like, where did you blink out of existence today? Where did you go to, Mount Rainier? We don't ever ask those questions. We don't ask the questions, where did the sun go? It's 1 a.m. and there is no sun. Our third trick is to be able to see what's unseen. Sometimes the biggest challenge in faith is to put our faith in what's unseen. We can spend so much time affirming what is seen that we never bother with what is unseen. We live in a world that challenges us with ableism. It challenges us with racism. It challenges us with heterosexism. It challenges us with masculine misogyny. All of those things are very clearly seen. I think most people here would say that they're not having any trouble noticing the presence of those things. There is one line of thought that says, well, don't pay attention to those things. Pay attention to the opposite. But I actually want to refine that a little bit. Because sometimes if we just go along blandly and blindly, as if sexism is not happening, then I am doing nothing to halt its insidious progress. If I do nothing in the face of racism, if I just say, well, it's not really a big deal, then I am throwing my weight behind it. If we only say, well, heterosexism is what's right, because it's in the Bible. There's Adam and Eve. Clearly, that's, and that's the Old Testament. It's an old book. It has to be right. It's an old book. We are invited, with remembering what's unseen, we are invited to call out what is seen and to name it as an affront. To name it as something against we will stand for its opposite, which is not yet seen. You may remember that a certain American soccer team won out of all the world. And the chant at the end of the women's victory was equal pay. They are making a claim for their rights. I learned in a report today, there was a question asking what countries in the world have gender parity. And gender parity is political representation, it's economic advantage,
They're even
it's
African?
it's healthcare, it's finances.
Huh.
And you want to know where there's gender parity? Oh, it's nowhere.
That's what I thought.
I was gonna
I was
say.
like-
It's nowhere.
Yeah.
I say that though because just because it doesn't exist yet, let us see that as the possibility. Let us see that as the divine right. Let us see ableism from disability. Let us see that every person that has obstacles has supports in place. Let us see that every person that when Black Lives Matter gets spoken and all lives matter, that we are able to say Black Lives Matter does not mean that all lives don't matter. It means that Black Lives Matter too. Let us speak to what is not yet, but what has every reason and right to exist. That's my invitation. Don't just settle for our own individual lives of that parking space. Oh, Mother, Father, God, let there be a parking place for me. And in the science of my teaching, a parking place will be my highest good, my best. And there's the parking place. It occurs. Let us see beyond where we're living. Let us see beyond how we're making our earning. Let us see beyond the person that we're living with or the persons that we're loving and the people in relationship. Let us see a broader world. Let us bring you that. Let us bring our commitment to that forward. So again, the three things for moving beyond our stories are changing our point of view. Be willing to see things differently. To be able to step beyond the familiar roles. When we get stuck in that old story of hero, victim, and villain, to be able to empathize, to be able to imagine. Now, one of the things about empathy is that sometimes people aren't going to be willing enough to take on another perspective. We can just offer it. If they don't take it up, we've offered it. It's not our responsibility to beat them over the head until they get it. But it is our responsibility to at least to bring it forward, to bring that possibility. And for ourselves, how often do I find myself getting stuck? To at least let myself move. And finally, that notion of remembering what's unseen. And ultimately to speak up for it. Because it's the power of our word that brings things into being. I say this, and I say this. That's how it is.
So those three things were, I know what the three things are, but it's for what? What's the title?
Oh, it's moving beyond our story.